Hello and welcome to CVC Interviews. My name is Melanie Merkel and I'm the host for today. Normally we have other hosts that do the show and I'm usually behind the scenes teaching everybody how to do everything that you don't see. But today I'm doing in front of the camera because we have a very special guest today who is actually also a CVC volunteer with us. So we do know him from being a floor manager and camera person here. So he is here to talk about some books that he wrote. And it's a very interesting topic that I can't wait for you all to learn more about. His name is Scott Vinci, and he is an author. And welcome to CVC Interviews.
Hi, Melanie. Great
How
to be
are
here.
you?
Thank you for inviting me as your guest.
Oh, you're very welcome. We appreciate you being here. And you've been a volunteer with us for quite a while, which has been, you've been great. We appreciate everything that you do for us. But it was great to finally get to know you and what you do, not as a volunteer here. So tell us a little bit first of kind of how you got started in this field.
Well, at a very early age, I was curious about the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. And I started to study on my own about what attracts people to each other, what doesn't attract people to each other, how there's a power differential in relationships, and I was observing some of that in my own life experience. And so I did a lot of independent research. I went to seminars. I watched videos that were available at the time. This was back in the late 70s, early 80s. But I started to learn a lot and really gain an enthusiasm and a passion for having an understanding of what was taking place. And I've always been a natural observer. I observe people, and I think that's what perhaps led me into my career in law enforcement. I spent 20 years as a law enforcement officer in Hartford. And in my work, I had the opportunity to be engaged with couples or people in relationships where there was conflict. Typically in law enforcement, we would call them a domestic violence complaint. And in that process, I learned how to interview people. I learned how to look for, and I was trained to look for nonverbal communications, signs that someone was being deceptive, how to ask probing questions to get below the surface information that someone was willing to provide and get to the deeper core of what was actually taking place in the situation. So that passion and that curiosity carried me into my academic studies. In junior college at Manchester Community College, I studied psychology. Years later, when I completed my law enforcement career and I went back to complete my master's degree, I studied adult education and adult learning processes and how to create strategic processes for change, behavioral change. And it was about that same time that I was introduced to an agency that was providing batterer intervention education to men that were being referred by the court system into a program.
Yeah, court ordered, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it all plays a part, all of it. And
it does.
Yeah. Being in law enforcement, did you find like certain neighborhoods, did you see it more in like did you see domestic violence more in poorer communities, richer communities, or was it equal?
I would say it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And later in our discussion, I'll tell you more why it's more pronounced today than it was even back then. But there's different levels of domestic abuse. There's different origins of domestic abuse or different forms of relationship abuse. When we talk about domestic abuse, we're talking about domestic violence. We're talking about family violence, which is family violence within a family system. And we talk about intimate partner violence, which might not be where people are cohabitating, like in domestic violence, but they're in an intimate relationship. And there's different manifestations of power or control within the dynamic of that relationship. So it was in every community, it was in every economic group, demographic, it was in every professional level, an academic level of training or experience. We had, when I was delivering the programs for the Nonviolence Alliance, which was the original agency that I worked for in Middletown, we were getting corporate executives, we were getting garage mechanics, we were getting waitresses and fashion designers, all walks of life.
All walks of life.
And so I think There's a lot of things that contribute to domestic abuse. Certainly insecurities do. Neurobiological elements where the brain isn't functioning properly contributes to it. Different levels of skill in just interpersonal communication. Someone's level of patience or tolerance, and what actions or interpretations of actions can trigger them to anger and to act out in an angry way. So it's a really broad spectrum of the causes and where you find it.
Yeah, the human mind is an interesting thing, because you really, one moment someone could be fine and the next minute they're snapping, and it's like, what led to that?
Right.
It can be scary. Because, you don't want to leave someone alone if they're, in that situation. And like you said, all walks of life, this can happen to. And there are so many scenarios out there of where violence can be,
Right.
And, it could be with children, it could be with just adults, it could be animals. I mean, anything, it's very scary, and it's great to have people like you who are shedding the light on it to people who might not be aware, or where maybe they were raised in a violent household, and then now they're on their own in life going, well, there's no biggie with this. This is how I was raised.
Right.
What's wrong with how I'm living? Right. I turned out fine, or, they say something like that, when really it's like, no, you're being abused and you deserve better.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that they do deserve better. And support groups, I think, have been so wonderful for some people, men too, because I know there's crazy women out there too that are, beating up their boyfriends, and it's, and they're afraid to say something,
Right.
and so it can go either way. It's not just men that, women can be bad too.
Right.
And it's so great that you're telling this to people, because there's some people who are so oblivious, and especially if they're in it and they don't have anybody on the outside to tell them that they do deserve better. So it's trying to get you out there more with your books and your lectures. So tell us, what is Life Strategies Network?
Life Strategies Network is the name of my agency.
Okay.
And it's a group of individuals that are either licensed therapists, social workers, group facilitators like myself, that operate from more of an education background than from a clinical background. And so when we come into contact with a client, we do an intake interview process where we determine what their needs might be and what their history has been. There may have been sexual abuse in a family situation. So they would need to work with a clinician who specializes in dealing with sexual abuse. There may be alcoholism or drug abuse, and so they need to work with someone who's a drug or alcohol counselor to help work through that issue. And then if there is patterns of domestic abuse or relationship abuse that we can identify, then we put them through the educational program, which is typically a 26-session program, 90 minutes once a week. And we focus on educating, expanding their awareness of what's taking place, expanding their options that are available for them in terms of services or life changes that they might be considering making. Mm-hmm. We help them develop strategies for taking those action steps that they choose on their own to make. Very often there's children involved, so there has to be consideration about what's the impact on the children, how do I plan for their needs if I'm going to be on my own and not have that other person in my life to either support me financially or provide the time and space to assist with the needs that the children might have. So we cover all those things. And so I'll share with you a little bit of the backstory.
Okay.
When I came into the Nonviolence Alliance in 2006, after completing my master's degree, the agency was taking referrals from the court and from the Department of Children and Families as a contractor for the state of Connecticut to provide batterer intervention education, which was a behavior modification program for men. And one of the things that I observed was that they weren't providing services at that time for the partner. And in many cases, the partner who was being abused wasn't ready to leave. They had their justifications for why they wanted to stay in the relationship.
A million reasons.
So I thought it would be a great opportunity to expand the business and include services for the partners. So when I took over the business in 2010, one of my goals was to expand to include that menu of services for the victims. So I decided that the title, Nonviolence Alliance, seemed to represent moving away from violence. And I wanted a title that represented moving towards higher life goals.
Okay.
So I came up with the title Life Strategies Network, and it represented a more encompassing service provider. And so that became the name of the company.
Wow. That's great that you thought of the victim, because they need help just as much as the abuser.
Right.
The abused and the abuser, they both need lots of help, different ways, but yeah.
Right.
Because for the abuser, therapy, counseling, ways to boost everything back up. I mean, it can be really tough for someone,
For the abuser, we want to teach them to take control of their feelings.
Yeah.
And not just to be in reactive mode.
Right.
For the abused, we want to help rebuild their sense of dignity, because if they've been through the process of abuse over a period of time, they feel trampled by their partner.
And find out what led to it.
Right, they've lost to that sense of who they are. And their self-esteem is very low. So in one of the books that we'll talk about, I've developed a process, a 4-step process to begin to rebuild that sense of dignity and that self-esteem over a relatively short period of time.
Wow. Okay, so you became involved with the subject of domestic abuse, and obviously this topic is extremely important to you, right?
It strikes at my heart, it really does. Without going into a lot of personal detail, because one of the things that I'm very mindful of in the work that I do and how I share the work that I do is not to put anybody in a position where they could be judged or identified or some way shamed for the experiences that they created or that they suffered through.
Right.
And so I try not to do that.
Yeah, well, that's really nice of you. And of course, like you said, when you did a lot of research about domestic abuse books, it seemed the most of them were written by a woman, which, seems odd for a man to be writing books, right? So what inspired you to write?
When I stepped into the Nonviolence Alliance as a group facilitator and started teaching the classes, I realized that everything that had happened in my life happened for a reason, and was building layer upon layer upon layer of knowledge and understanding so that I could do that work and not only understand where the perpetrator was coming from in his life experience, but where the victim was in their life experience. And we've all heard stories of people who've been abused in relationships, primarily women, and people say, I just don't understand why she doesn't leave. And like you were alluding to just a moment ago, people that have experienced abuse in early childhood, in their developmental years, tend to normalize the abuse of their abusive partner as just the way they are. And it's just up to me to learn to deal with it. Well, guess what? You don't have to learn to deal with it. You have to learn how to elevate yourself above the situation, identify your boundaries, identify consequences for the behavior, and what are the decisions you're going to make if the behavior persists. And that's some of what we do in the trainings, is we guide them through that process.
And I like the title too, because it's If I Had Known. So yeah, early warning signs. Women said they wish they had known before their worst intimate relationship. So, you hear the term red flag, right, tons of times, and right, you wonder, is it a red flag? Sometimes you don't know, are you judging maybe someone too much? I mean, that's the thing of then how do these women try to build themselves back up to be able to go back out into the world without being afraid and, looking for those signs, right?
Right. Well, the words red flags in our society have trended beyond the reality of what actually is a red flag of domestic abuse. Any type of aberrant behavior where someone is offended now, people will call it out as a red flag. Yeah. It's really not.
Yeah.
Okay? But there are definitely red flags that need to be paid attention to. And my goal in writing this book was to identify the subtle clues that are revealed before the red flags manifest. And that's why I call it the early warning signs. And so, to give you the story of how that book came about, it was in my mind to write that book. And that's the book that I was most passionate about writing. So in 2020, when COVID hit and everything was shut down, and all of our classes, our 17 classes per week throughout the state of Connecticut, were shut down overnight. I signed up for a writing group through a mentor of mine who I had followed during the 1980s. And he was offering a writing class, guaranteeing that you could write a book in 90 days and get it published on Amazon. So I said, that's cool.
That's a good deal.
That'd be like a life dream coming true for me. So I entered into the group with the intention of writing that book. And with the help of the mentor and his co-host for that program, they helped me develop the image for the cover. But I created the title because I wanted it to reveal the remorse, in a sense, that a woman would have not following her gut instinct about someone that maybe she had a twinge, or maybe she overlooked a certain behavior, maybe it was normalized for her, but that following up, she would say, geez, you know, I wish I paid attention to that. I wish I had known that that would lead to further abuse later on in the relationship. And so that was my thought. And in the course of the program, some of the women were speaking to me outside of the scheduled classes about their own experience with domestic abuse. And one of the women from New Orleans, in one of our conversations, said to me, I wish I had known. You know, listen to you talk about your work and listen to the intensity that you bring to it, the passion, and the level of your understanding of the patterns of abuse. I wish I had known. So I said, wow, that's going to be the title of this book. You've just confirmed for me the feeling that I had for myself, that that would be the title. So then the subtitle became The Early Warning Signs, that the women who I had interacted with during the course of running the group programs, that were partners of the perpetrators that were in our program, when they had said, you know, I saw it very early on, but I didn't pay attention to it, or I wish I had known that this would lead to something in the future. So this book became everything that those women had told me that either happened and they ignored it, or they didn't recognize at the time. And so I wanted the subtitle to capture that. So that subtitle is The Early Warning Signs. Women said they wish they had known before their worst intimate relationship.
That's true. If I had known, or even, you know, I wish I had left sooner. You know, I hear things like that too.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of going into like high schools and like teaching to like seniors? You know how they do like those days where they have people come in, like all like those life recovery coaches and stuff. Like, have you ever thought of going into high schools?
I think about it every day.
Yeah.
I've presented at some colleges in the state of Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut, Central Connecticut. I'd like to get into high schools. I've never had my invitation accepted yet at that level. I've been told that there is insurance regulations they have to be mindful of about what's presented to the students, and perhaps the students aren't ready for that kind of information. I think they are.
I think they are. Yeah. Something had come into my high school when I was a senior, and yeah, it was a day where you picked. So it was all different types of things. So it was like you could learn about drugs and, you know, drinking and driving. You could learn about domestic violence. You could learn about HIV. You could learn, you know, it was all these topics that you could learn about, and you picked which classes you wanted to go to. And a bunch of us girls were like, let's go to the domestic violence one. And we went, and it was parents of this girl who unfortunately had been murdered by her husband. And they talked about all of what had happened, what she was dealing with, and how she kept going back. And then eventually he ended up killing her, which is, you know, which is what you don't want, of course. So of course we're trying to prevent all that from happening. But it can be scary for somebody, though, who does finally leave, and then what? You know, when you do leave, now what? You know, you feel like you're looking over your shoulder all the time. You know? Well,
in the back of If I Had Known, there is what I consider a safe, or a complete safe exit strategy. It's actually called the Safe Escape Exit Plan. And I went to a variety of academic resources and agencies that support women who are choosing to leave, and took elements of their recommendations and consolidated them all into a strategy that follows the word prepare, P-R-E-P-A-R-E. And I can't recite word for word what each one of those is for you right now, but it's designed to be easy to remember and to follow that acronym.
So almost like some of these women, it's not, you know, it's not just a get out type thing. It's like you prepare yourself to get out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's steps that you need to take to make sure that once you
You're
do
safe.
leave, you have some financial resources available to you. You have a place to live. You're not living in your car. You have support services that you've connected with. You have someone that you've contacted within the local law enforcement agency, for example, to connect with on a regular basis to ensure your safety, to make sure you don't disappear into the night, no one ever hears from you again, which is a reality. Look at the Jennifer Dulos case,
Yeah.
still never found to this day.
I know.
She's mentioned in the book. I'm sure you recall the case where the Eastern Connecticut State College student from Stanford disappeared.
Yes, I do remember
And it was
that.
quite a while before her body was located in the woods down in the southern part of Connecticut. And cases like that do happen. So
Yeah.
there's all these things that you need to take care of before you actually make the safe escape.
Yeah. So congratulations on that first book. So that must have been, yeah, like you said, a dream come true to write it. But then you wrote a second one.
I did.
So tell us
Okay.
about the second one.
Well, an interesting story with that. While I was in this writing group and speaking with these women on the side, one of the women shared with me how difficult her experience was in her marriage. And she said, I wish someone had written a book that would have helped me kind of regain my footing after I left, because when I left, I was lost. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my goals were. I didn't have any sense of where I was going to go or how I was going to support myself. So I hit myself on the side of the head and I said, I can write that book. I've got all that information right here.
Good, yeah.
And I've probably got notes to go with it. So over the course of Memorial Day weekend, 2020, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I sat down and I wrote out 80 pages. And when I organized all my raw thoughts, I realized I had a book. And what she said to me in our conversation was, I was bruised, but I wasn't broken. So I said, that's going to be the title of the book. So that book actually got finished first and got published in October of 2020 on Amazon and went to #1 in the category of domestic abuse
Recovery,
books.
yeah.
Yep.
So you have one for women and you have one for men versions?
Well, because I'm very active in this community for recovery from relationship abuse, including narcissism, which is another form of relationship abuse. It's not necessarily violent, can be, but not necessarily is. I participate in several Facebook groups that are support groups for people suffering from narcissism.
Yeah, that would be
And
awful.
I go into those groups, I answer questions, I offer some guidance from my years of experience. And some men contacted me and said, you know, I see you've got books for women, why don't you write a book for men?
Yeah. Women are narcissists too.
And I said, ask and you shall receive. So I took the text of Bruised Not Broken and I adapted it for men, changed some exercises and changed some of the wording around. Essentially, it's the same 4-step strategy. And published Bruised Not Broken for men, and that's also available on Amazon.
That's wonderful because, like I said in the beginning, you know, you don't know who's getting. So it's great to have both options.
Right.
That's fantastic. So they're just all steps and information in these books. None of it is like personal stories or anything. It's all information.
Well, I'm glad you asked. In Bruised Not Broken, there's 3 parts to that book. The first is the 4-step strategy. And I describe that as climbing the rungs of a ladder. Ladder rung 1, ladder rung 2, ladder rung 3, ladder rung 4. Interspersed in between each of the ladder rungs, I tell Monica's story. I tell a story about Monica. Now, I won't disclose who Monica is, but Monica left an abusive relationship and rebuilt her life and has a fabulous life now as a mature senior adult. And so I have her story. And then at the end of the book, I have the 4 pillars of authentic love from Greek mythology. And it describes the 4 important elements of authentic love, including erotic love, friendship. Now, right at the moment, I can't think of the other 2, but those are the 2 that get the most attention. Empathy is a form of love, the giving part of love. I think that's referred to in the book as agape love, which also can be found in Scripture.
Okay.
It's the purest form of unconditional love. So that's included in there. So you do get a few extra things in that book, besides just the academic strategy, if you will.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wow, Scott, this has been, I really wish we could talk more with you. This has been great. Maybe we'll get you back in for like a part 2. I'm sure you have more ideas to write more books. So I really thank you for your time. And thank you again for being a CVC volunteer. We always appreciate you. So thank you again for watching CVC Interviews. This has been a great interview with Scott. Please check out his books on Amazon. And if you do need help, please don't be afraid to reach out. And the help is out there and there are resources out there. So please search for it if you need it. So thank you so much for watching. This has been Melanie, and take care.